This video is part of our frequently asked questions series. This video is going to be talking about thread. We're going to look at a couple of different things real quick. One of the questions was, what thread should I use in my Bernina? And specifically she was asking about embroidery thread, so we'll talk about that first. Let's start with, when we're talking about embroidery thread using the module or doing decorative stitches, built-in decorative stitches. So let's start with weight. When doing embroidery using your module or your built-in stitches, a 40 weight top thread is always a good rule of thumb. And a bobbin weight thread should always be 60 weight or higher. The numbers go backwards on the bobbin weight, so it's not exactly what you would think. The higher the number, the finer the thread. And bottom weight or Invisifill are my favorite bobbin threads. And embroidery thread comes in several different fibers. Polyester, rayon, metallic. I think some of these are polyester. Here's a metallic thread, rayon. This is regular sewing thread. This is a polyester, and this is a polyester cotton blend. And this is sulky, so I believe it is rayon, viscose rayon, 100%. And this is bobbin thread. And you can kind of see that, I'll pull a little thread off here, and you can kind of see how fine this is. This is 60 weight. And let me put one of these threads beside it. And you can see this is way smaller and this is heavier. Use a quality thread. Try not to pick threads up at garage sales or estate sales. Just get new, good thread. Thread that comes from your local quilt shop or Bernina dealer. Those are the best threads. Places like Walmart and Target and even Joann's, Hobby Lobby, those are great places to get thread, but the thread that is sold there is not anything like what you're going to get from your local dealer. So talking about the fibers, some of these threads are wound straight around. This one's straight around or flat. This is wound flat. This, if you can see it, I guess we can't see it very good. Let's try this one. It's a little better. This is cross wound. So these threads have to come off the spool differently for them to work. So this spool is going to go on your machine horizontally. This spool is going to go on your machine vertically. Metallic thread is an entirely different color of animal, and it is a flat spun thread. So if you think of quilt binding, that's flat. And that's what metallic thread looks like if you could see it under a microscope. It's flat. And so it must come off the machine flat. So I use a thread director. You can get these on Amazon. And a spool of thread goes on here. The spool of thread goes on here. And this sits on the top of my machine. And it lets the thread feed off flat, right off the spool, and I never have any trouble with metallic thread as long as, and this would be true with all threads, you are using the correct needle for the kind of thread you're using. So for here you would want to use a metallic needle. Some of these others you might want to use a universal. And if you're doing embroidery on your Bernina with your module, you especially want to use use the correct loading of the thread spool And size, I mean, if you have a spool holder, sometimes I put this in a fruit jar down beside the size of spool. It's a cone beside my machine, and that way I get the correct threading and the correct needle, and you're going to use embroidery needles for your embroidery. Also, something that solves a million little problems with threads, thread nests, all kinds of troubles with thread is using a spool net. This little guy right here, which you should have had several come in your with your machine, will solve a multitude of problems. Just take the time and try it. I have mine folded over. I like to fold it over so that I can kind of pinch it when I get it on my machine between the foam pad and the spool cap. And so, you know, if it wasn't folded over, it would be long and flat, look like that. So let's see, is there anything else? Some threads I don't know why, but people do have trouble with some threads with their Berninas. This is just my opinion, but I use any thread that I want to in my machine. I bought a top-of-the-line machine, and it does not get to choose what thread I use. I choose. I feel the same thing about regular sewing thread. As long as I have my machine threaded properly for the specific thread that I'm using, and I'm using the correct needle and stabilizer if needed, if I'm doing embroidery, my work should always stitch out perfectly, and almost always does. The notion that I can't sew with any thread or color that I want to just doesn't enter my mind. So there is a quick little video on threads.